Riley's Story Part 2. If you haven't seen Part 1, that was further up in the thread, and this is a continuation of that story. And we've set the scene of what sort of a dog Riley actually was, or rather hound, because greyhounds are always hounds, they're never simply just dogs. And he truly was his own majestic self, and really just had us as subjects to look after his royal needs and pay homage to him. One day though, Bailey, his chocolate Labrador sister, fell ill. I was laying on the bed with Bailey beside me and noticed her breathing was not quite right, and she seemed to have a bit of swelling over her ribs. She was my princess, so it was a quick dash down to have her checked over by the emergency vet. The vet suspected a twisted bowel or stomach torsion, but was not quite sure and gave her pain relief and advised us to see her regular vet the next day. Our regular vet couldn't see anything either, and there was no signs of any swelling, but he did think that she wasn't quite right, so decided to keep her for a few hours and just see what he made of her. That afternoon, he rang us to say that whilst taking her for a walk, he'd looked down at her and he'd seen a distinct swelling around her ribs, and he'd taken some samples and he was awaiting the results, but he was fairly certain it was a cancer, a mast cell tumour to be specific, which are notoriously difficult to treat and is in effect a death sentence. Canine cancer therapy though has come quite a long way in the last few years, so he suggested a specialist oncology unit who's based in Australia, and so we jumped at the chance of that. Samples were sent, x-rays were faxed through, emailed through, and within a day or so we had a treatment plan and, unfortunately, a confirmation of the mast cell tumour. There was no point doing any surgery. It was too heavily intertwined around her ribs, so it was a case of chemotherapy. Unfortunately though, 9 months after initial diagnosis, the chemo no longer actually seemed to be doing any good. She took a turn for the worse and would not eat, and for a Labrador, that's a real bad sign when a Labrador won't eat. So, with heavy hearts, we had to accompany her for one last car ride to the vets and a final walk into the vet's consulting room. Bailey was placed on the table, and with us holding and stroking her and telling her how much she was loved, she was finally at peace. Returning home without her was really tough. Riley, however, did not seem to notice initially. There was no looking around for her, and he carried on very much as before, except he did not want to go outside in his run during the day, where happily he'd gone before, and that was next door to Bailey's run. So he ended up staying inside during the day and sleeping. He was a good boy, so there was no problems with that. He did seem to keep a closer eye on us though, and would sometimes wander into any room we were in just to see if we were there before he'd wander back out again nonchalantly. So, where's the spooky element, I hear you ask? Bailey's passed away, but the story's about Riley. I'll get to that. Well, Bailey, if you remember, was a 10 on the visibly showing affection scale and letting you know and show your own affection to her. She knew she was well loved, and she knew that we loved her. So there were no strange occurrences or feeling of spirit, well, at least not for a couple of years. My theory on that is because of the surety of how she felt, and we felt, that she'd no need to visit. In fact, I had the very strong impression that she was having an absolute ball, literally, across the Rainbow Bridge. Riley continued to be Riley, and a couple of years later, it was just Riley and myself as bachelors free. Riley, as ever, was very nonplussed, apart from not having a second pair of hands, of course, to feed him and do his regal homage, although his mum did come and take him out sometimes and looked after him when I went away for work. It's funny though, because the first night that it was just the two of us home together, I heard his feet coming up the stairs. and he plonked himself down on the floor in the bedroom and never slept anywhere else but in the room with me on a night time. I think he must have thought, hey, my subject members keep disappearing. I better keep an eye on this one. There were lots of occasions when I let him out in the garden, and if it was cold and windy and blowing, I'd close the door and let him do his business, and then I'd go along and I'd potter around the house and make a coffee or just do things, listen to the radio. And it was quite odd because maybe about 3 times spread over quite a period of time, I'd come back into the lounge to actually let him back in the door again, and I'd find him inside and the door still closed. The first time I thought, I must have been listening to the radio and just absent-mindedly let him in and forgotten about it. And even subsequent couple of times, it was a bit that way, but I just knew I hadn't really. Once I also found that the lazy boy chair back had been pushed down. And Bailey did have a party trick, and that was that she'd jump on a lazy boy chair and push the back down and use it as a bed. Now, Riley never went on the chairs. He did the beds, the couches and such like, but never the chairs. They were too small for him. So I do wonder if Bailey actually came to visit Riley. Anyway, sometime later, my ex-partner gave me a framed photo of Riley for Christmas. As I opened it up and looked at the photo, I had a sudden feeling of foreboding. And a few weeks later, this feeling came back to haunt me when Riley developed a painful limp and had to go to the vet to be checked out. A quick check revealed nothing, and the vet thought it was just a sprain. They were very busy though, and the vet offhandedly said, I don't think it's anything to worry about, but if you want we could always do an x-ray, but you'd have to come back for it. I had an instinct though that all was not quite as rosy as the vet thought, and I said, yep, I would like an x-ray. So back Riley and myself went the next day. Riley had to be anaesthetised for the x-ray, and so they kept him in for a few hours. The vet reception person rang me to say he was ready for pickup, but was very cagey on the phone when I asked if all went well. So I was expecting the worst when I returned. It's bone cancer, osteo, the vet informed me. I asked what that meant, hoping it was treatable, but was told it was probably one of the worst canine cancers. There was amputation, but he was getting on in years, and I was not sure that would be kind for him. He was a dog that loved to run. Besides, the vet said often the amputation is too late, as secondaries could be spreading to the lungs already, even by the time it's diagnosed. An agreement was made, though, that Riley and myself would return the next day, and having taken on board the thoughts and prognosis, we'd make a decision on Riley. So, with a heavy heart, I returned to the vet the next day and had thought that I'd be returning home alone without my big boy. I was in luck though, as the vet who had overseen Bailey's treatment was in the building. And one point which I have forgotten to mention was that he knew Riley very well. For Riley, as well as being an ex-racing dog or retired athlete, as I like to think, was also a canine blood donor. Riley had a number of times been called up, by myself of course, to go and give blood to help other dogs. If a dog had a major operation requiring blood, he was there, and on one occasion helped a dog who had been poisoned and was not responding to vitamin K and looked like they were going to pass away. Greyhound blood is special blood. For a start, a large number of greyhounds are universal canine blood donors, and Riley was one of these. Also, greyhound blood has a different percentage composition of blood cells and is high in red oxygen carrying cells. It's like a super tonic for other dogs and helps with the uptake of oxygen and healing. Bailey's vet was their chief surgeon, so many times he'd called up Riley's services and liked Bailey because of his calm nature. I think we can make him comfortable and give him a good few months yet, the vet said. There would be no major chemo for Riley, but pain relief, regular checks and monthly infusions to help prevent calcium loss. So began a routine of monthly visits to the vet for infusions, However, early on in the process, Riley detected an infected wound on his leg. It started as a small mark, but with licking he made the wound raw and it became a large red infected mess. We tried everything: bandages, gauze, paraffin dressings, honey, leaving the wound uncovered, covering it, calendula and laser treatment before it was finally brought under control. It was touch and go though, and each day I would have to give him meds and change his dressings, as well as frequent vet visits. He became so used to the vets that I would take the lead off him in the vets, and he would walk straight into whatever pen they opened the door for him to walk into. They found that fascinating. He had a multitude of bright bandages and casts, and one day I picked him up around 7 p.m. after he'd spent the vet at the day for his infusion and some x-rays. There was a puppy preschool class in the large waiting room, set off to one side of the surgery, because the surgery was closed apart from people doing pickups. All these very small puppies were running around with the owners sat in a semicircle. They were all busy doing puppy things. The vet nurse brought Riley out to me, and as he walked across the waiting room, all the small puppies went silent and still and looked at this huge great hound with a large white bandage as he regally walked by like a king. It was quite a surreal moment, and one I often think about. With the daily care and attention, not to mention middle of the night walks into the garden with him when he felt like he needed to pee or just for a wander, Riley and myself started to grow a lot closer. He let me poke my fingers in his mouth to drop his tablets in, and never minded when I had to change his dressings and rub cream on his tender wound. He still never wanted to sit beside me though, until one day out of the blue, he came up on the settee and laid his head over me. I felt like an absolute king myself that day. So he grew close, but he still rarely showed his feelings, although always wanted to be near me. I bought a camera to watch him during the day and activated if he moved or made a sound. He slept most of the day, and I would be lucky to have more than a couple of activations during the day. Cancer, though, is an unforgiving and relentless opponent, and one day all the meds and infusions in the world were not enough to keep it at bay, and like Bailey before him, Riley had to make the final walk into the surgery. It was arranged for late that Saturday morning, and I rang his mum also to accompany us. So, with no dry eyes, either from us or the vet team, Riley peacefully left us. It was so hard, but the last gift we could give him of a painless exit. Arrangements were made that he would be cremated and his ashes returned. On Monday I went to work as normal. My day was not undisturbed though. That morning I received multiple sound activations on the home camera, and each time I checked, there was no discernible activity. I think I must have had around 20 or 30 activations, where previously, even with Riley in the house, I'd have only had a couple. Every time I checked the camera, there was nothing there. It was just normal. After an hour though, these stopped. And I wouldn't say I forgot about them because it was so odd, but I put it in the back of my mind. Nothing strange occurred Tuesday or Wednesday during the day, but when I came home from work on Wednesday, I was feeling a bit low and did nothing other than come in the door, grab my iPad to check what was happening around in the world and just chill out for a few minutes quietly. Sometime after 5 o'clock, the smoke alarm in the lounge went off. What the heck is that, I thought. Now, I was sitting not 5 meters away from it. There was no smoke, no fumes, nothing that would set it off. I hadn't even put the jug on to make a cup of tea. So I thought, this is really odd. I tried waving a towel at it to make it stop, pressing its button, but nothing would stop it. In the end, I had to remove it from the wall and turn it off. I had a sneaky suspicion, though, that I knew what was at play. The next morning, I restored the alarm, and over the last couple of years, apart from once when I actually burnt some food, it's never gone off since. At the end of that week, the vets rang to say Riley's ashes were ready to be picked up. Before picking them up, I confided to Riley's mum that I thought the camera going off that Monday morning was Riley being moved from the vets to the crematorium, and that the smoke alarm I thought on the Wednesday evening was him being cremated. So when I got to the vets, I just said out of curiosity, when was he picked up by the crematorium people? That would be Monday morning, was the reply. What about the actual cremation, I asked. What date did that take place? They didn't know the cremation date, but did know that they always did them in early evening, something about the consents that they actually had. The ashes came with a card, though, from the crematorium, and when I opened up the package and the card as I stood at the counter, I looked at it. After I'd looked at it with a smile, I handed it to Riley's mum, who had also come through. I'd seen what I needed to see. It listed his name, the normal condolences, and the date of his cremation. It was the Wednesday that the smoke detector had gone off. I think he came to visit me. Why do I think that Riley, my aloof boy, came to say hi? Well, I think he came to say hi, I love you, and I know how much you love me. The days and weeks following, I had this distinct feeling that he was around the place and would often feel a sense of deep peace. He'd always been a calm boy, and I think he was channeling some of his calmness to me. I used to think of it as channeling my inner greyhound. There were a few other occasions when he made his presence known. I have a few people set up with different ringtones and message tones, and have a tone for his mum set up. A few days after he passed, the tone indicated a message from her, but when I checked, there was no message from anybody. I think that was him letting me know he was visiting her. Now, I have a friend in the States who I know from greyhound adoption work, and she also runs her own tarot and light worker business. And I happened to come across a Facebook post on her business page, which appeared just in my feed one day. It was about these type of electrical events, but it was dated a good year before for the actual article, but had only just appeared on a feed. So I emailed her to say I saw the post and explained my story. She emailed me straight back. She said, well, that's funny, that she'd found that the post had popped up on her page that morning after having been dormant and wasn't due to actually come up on the page for quite some time. She had a feeling, though, that she was going to get a message about this because that's how these things normally work. And so she was able to give me some insight into the electrical side of things, and the name Uriel even cropped up. There have been other odd occurrences since from time to time, and I mentioned on my previous post about when my former mother-in-law was in hospital about to start her journey into the unknown, that fire alarm at work activated around her immediately before she passed. So I do wonder if that was Riley coming to say hi around that one as well. So that's Riley's story.